now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here is Reverend Martin.
I'd like to welcome you to the broadcast entitled It's Time. Yes, that's my harangue, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. What is it time for? Well, it is time for justice. It is time for social justice, medical justice, environmental justice, ecological justice, and above all, it is time for economic justice, which must involve reparations for past neglect and past discrimination acts, lawful de jure acts committed against one segment of the population, to hold that segment back, and at the same time, an affirmative and positive action on behalf of the same government to aid and benefit and promote the general welfare of another population, because we live in a nation of laws and not of men, and we stress and brag about liberty and justice for all. And as the late Thurgood Marshall said about the United States Constitution, there was one of the great contradiction, or other word, a phrase I'm going to use, cognitive dissonance, is that it speaks of justice, of liberty and justice for all, while it denied liberty and justice, both of them, to the Negro. And that is what we are confronted with and battling with and laboring with, and until the country truly and positively confronts, acknowledges, admits, confesses this awesome guilt, this awesome sin, this awesome crime that has been committed against its own citizen. Even psychology says you're going to have a hard time going forward because you are repressing things that are going to keep popping up into the subconscious and into the present. And indeed, a lot of the aberrations and pathologies that we see in the body politic no doubt have their origins in this subconscious guilt from which this nation runs away. I may have neglected to say I'm a pastor of the church here in Los Angeles, the New Life Institutional Baptist Church and of Los Angeles, and I've been pastor there 45 years. We thank God for the journey and the sojourn, and we encourage you to join us in this fight, in this effort, in this protest for justice for all in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Speaking of reparations, my brothers and my sisters, I would like to address your attention, call attention to Deuteronomy chapter 15, Old Testament book of the Bible. It says, beginning in verse 12 of that 15th chapter of Deuteronomy, and if thy brother, an Hebrew man, or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let them go free. And when thou sendest them out free from thee, thou shalt not let them go away empty. Already you can see that there's been a huge contradiction and a huge violation between the biblical mandate or the biblical requirement for how one is to release a person from slavery and the quote-unquote Bible Belt, Bible believers, the Bible believers' conduct of just simply sending the slave away empty with nothing. And so right there, you see that God's way is different. Indeed, as the writer Isaiah tells us, reminds us in the 55th chapter there, God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. But let me not get lost. Notice, if you please, thou shalt not let them go away empty. Thou shalt liberally. Oh, is that the origin of that word? Is that why the conservatives claim to hate the liberal? The Bible says, thou shalt liberally furnish, thou shalt furnish them liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress, of that wherewith the Lord thy God has blessed thee. Thou shalt give, not sell, give unto them. And so all of that sharecropping that our folks had to endure, and all of that outright segregation and systemic racism with all of its degradations and depredations and deprivation that our people have had to languish under in this nation from its founding even until now, all of that has to be redressed. And thank God for Congressman John Conyers, who introduced House Resolution 40 over 40 years ago, to study the effects of slavery and to seek a system or method by which reparations for slavery could be administered to those who have been the victims of its legacy, meaning the descendants of the slaves. All right. Listen, God says, and thou shalt remember, speaking to the whole Hebrew race at that moment, thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt. The Lord thy God redeemed thee, therefore I command thee this thing today. All right. And go down to verse number 18. It shall not seem hard unto thee when thou sendest them away free from thee, for they have been worth a double hired servant to thee in serving thee 6 years, and the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all that thou doest. One of the great tragedies or the great contradictions of those who say we can't afford reparation is the very fact that if the United States government paid the descendants of the slaves, why, everybody's going to take that money and do what? Put it immediately back into the economy. It's nothing but what? A win-win situation. And the only thing that holds it up is larceny and hatred on the part of those who are empowered and to whose necessity it is to write that check. And that would be the industrialists. And everybody throws up the argument, well, in the case in the Bible, the person served 6 years, and the owner or the person that they served knew that and was immediately to give them reparations or furnish them the things that they needed to make it. If they came in there walking, they're going to go out of there with a camel or with a donkey, with some sheep, some oxen, some mules. They wasn't going out of there empty. And they're going to have some saddlebags on that camel and all of that, loaded with what? Corn and wheat and barley and all of the wonderful things that it takes in order for a person to make it. And when you compare that to how the American Negro was treated, or the black man and black woman were treated here in America, why, it is sheerly criminal. It goes without saying that if you don't have nothing and you don't give me nothing and you don't work me for 246 years, and you ain't paid me a dime. My Savior, what do you think? What was that Thomas Jefferson said? I tremble when I think that our God is a God of justice and that he must not sleep forever. Well, we have come to that point, my brothers, my friends. Last stop is reparations. If we don't get it right this time, one can look for the deluge of judgment. Notice again in Deuteronomy chapter 24, thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether they be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. That means we are not to be oppressive of the poor and needy. We are to be what? Helpers, uplifters, encouragers, restorers, repairers of the breach, restorers of paths to dwell in. Our hand is to be open. Open thine hand, as it says here in the Old Testament text, and give liberally unto thy brother, because you identify the need. You know the need. You know she needs. And if you know that they stand in the need, and you can have genuinely identified, and it's very apparent that there is a need, and you have an abundance, then you cannot shut up your bowels of mercy. All right. Notice, however, in this, now the first was about a slave. Second was about the person who's working for you, sharecropper. Huh? At their day, thou shalt give them their hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for they are poor, and set their hearts upon it, lest they cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. And as I sometimes observe, this commandment or this instruction, this Mishnah, is observed more in the breach than in the obedience or observant, because of the fact that if you know anything about the history of sharecropping, which was another form of slavery in the United States of America following the Civil War, whereby the farmer owned the land and brought these poor sharecroppers on board. And what was the share was that the person who was the sharecropper agreed with the owner of the land, the farmer, to work his land for him, and in return, the farmer would give the sharecropper a benefit of a certain amount, a proportion or percentage of the yield of the harvest from his field. And the farmer was to would naturally supply the field. He would supply the corn or the grain or the whatever that was going to be planted, and it was the job of the sharecropper to see that it was properly planted, see that it was weeded and kept clean and in a healthy state where it could grow. And it was the job of the sharecropper to take care of that farm, take care of that crop like it was his crop. And then when the settle up time come, when the harvest was brought in and it had been taken to the mill or taken to the market, and the cotton had been weighed, or the tobacco, or the peanuts, or the corn, or all of the various products of agriculture that were grown, then of course when it comes selling up time, then is where we find the larceny in the heart of the farmer. Or they always told the poor sharecropper, well, you almost made it this year. If you'd have made one more bale, you'd have broke even. And so as it is now, you're still in debt. And there's the farmer's wife waiting for him to bring home the money from all of that year's worth of labor and work. And there he comes back. We ain't got no money coming, baby. Can you imagine how that farmer, that sharecropper must feel, how his poor wife and children standing there half naked must feel? And so they ain't got nowhere to go. They got to turn around and sign a contract to work with this same farmer for another year. If they got to have clothes for the winter, they got to buy it from the farmer's store, or they got to get a credit from the farmer. So that in those ways, you see the evil that was perpetrated against the sharecropper by the farm owner, which was no different from what happened during slavery, was it? Worked the slave at that time. They worked the post-slave until he died, and they made sure he died because the insurance policy would pay off if you worked the slave to death. They didn't want to give the slave much health care if he didn't die. Just like now, Trump don't want you to have no health care. The governors of the poorest states in the union, well, not all of them are poor. Texas is quite rich. They don't want the people to have no health care. Why? Because they don't want them to live. They don't want to have no good lifestyle. They don't want healthy people. And so you see the same pattern and model being practiced from slavery all the way up to this present hour. Why are they fighting against Obamacare? Because they don't want to do anything to help, benefit, uplift, elevate the poor. By the way, that's the purpose of government, to do for the people what the people cannot do for themselves. That's what Abraham Lincoln said. That's what Lyndon Baines Johnson articulated. And that is really what is in the Constitution, to provide a more perfect union, to provide for ourselves and our posterity. Granted, that when that Constitution was written, we the people meant we the white people, as Thurgood Marshall so brilliantly intoned remarked in 1987. And as Judge Roger Taney eloquently wrote in the Dred Scott decision, and we're still battling those evils. And regardless of what how the Roberts Court says that segregation was a private matter, it was not private, it was de jure. That means it was by law. It was not de facto, which is by practice only. It was de jure, which was by law, which means it was in codes, it was in statutes, and the like. You have codes and law, you have codes, you have statutes, you have ordinances, and all of that various milieu. I won't get into those terminology because I'm not that well versed in it, but you know what you're talking about. And so it's a good thing that now I was in New York the other week for the National Action Network annual convention, and we heard from the various some of the various political candidates, and one question that was asked of them was, will you, if the Congress brings legislation to support reparation, will you sign the bill if you're president? And to a person, to a man, to a woman, they all signified yes. And as I told you on another occasion, we know that this, of course, is a smokescreen, that we haven't got to the promised land yet. We're many years from attainment of true reparation, but the point that to be observed is that at least, finally, thank God that you have national candidates on the national political scene talking about reparations in the public square, whereas before, reparation was a taboo subject. You couldn't even bring it up. It was ridiculous. It met with nothing but sarcasm. But now, at least, we're beginning to discuss and talk about the possibility of reparation for slavery. Isn't that wonderful? Who would have thought it? And I'm sure that the fight is a long way from over, as the abolitionists who fought so valiantly to end slavery were reminded, but yet they continue to fight on. And so we must likewise not be dismayed or discouraged by the things that may come to pass that tend to seem like they're going to set reparations back. Remember, a few years ago, it was just taboo to even mention the word reparation. But now you got reputable politicians, not black ones, you got white ones, you got Muslim men and women who are in the Congress of the United States now and who are governors and mayors of states and cities speaking on the stump about reparations. Don't tell me God don't work in mysterious ways. He can work it out. And we just have to remain vigilant and continue to fight this fight, to struggle in this, as Dr. King called it, a beautiful struggle, in order to advance the ball, to advance this baton. I have no illusion that in my generation I shall embrace reparations, but I'm going to do my best to advance the baton, to advance the ball. I'm going to run my relay, and I'm going to pass it off to the next generation that they might be that much closer to winning the race, the marathon, for reparation. And it was good to hear the candidates say something positive about atoning for the great sin of chattel slavery here as it was experienced in the United States of America. And remember, that legacy is with us. Those effects, those consequences, those results are still very much with us at this very hour. No, I wasn't born a slave. No, you wasn't born a slave master. True enough. But we are both. You are the beneficiary, and I, on my part, am still suffering under the effects, the consequences of what we did not get during slavery. Somebody say, well, you don't need to be looking back, but why you always talking about remember the Alamo? Why you always talking about St. Patty's Day? But you don't want me to look back and see something that we could do something about? We can do something about slavery. We can do something about the injustices that are apparent and prevalent as a result and as a consequence and as an effect of those 246 years of unrequited toil, as late President Abraham Lincoln so eloquently described what is going on. And we want to thank God for his divine providence, by which he wills and makes all things work together for good to them that love him and to them that are called according to his purpose. We don't always understand which way God is going. As Abraham Lincoln said, the Almighty has his own purpose. A lot of times we don't see it. We think we're in it, but we're not in it. And one of the hardest things I think in the world is to think that our will is not God's will, and God's will is not our will, and that we're willing that the person that we're praying for should get one result, and God's will is not our will. It's a terrible thing to have to say we yield and we bow in almost submission to the will of God. But the Almighty has his own purposes. And so we have this, what is it, a paradox, this contradiction that we continue to battle in life between the will of God and the will of man? Yes. And believe me, the will of God must always prevail. I want to note that in Abraham Lincoln's meditation on the divine will, which is just a little scrap, a little excerpt, as though a man was thinking and writing down something that he was thinking. Abraham Lincoln at least left this much of an extract, which you and I have those same thoughts. We just don't speak them as well. He says, the will of God prevails in great contests, Each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Both may be, and one must be wrong. We don't like to be wrong, my brothers and sisters. Because God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time. In the present civil war, it is possible that God's purpose is something different from the purpose of either party, and yet the human instrumentalities, working just as they do, are of the best adaptation to effect His purpose. Yes, I am almost ready to say that this is probably true, that God willed this contest and wills that it shall not end. By His mere great power on the minds of the contestants, He could have either saved or destroyed the Union without a human contest. Yet the contest began, and having begun, he could give the final victory to either side at any day. Yet the contest proceeds. So we who speak so glibly about knowing what God's will is, we may not always know the will of God. It may be deeper than we can perceive. Think in your minds on the death of Nipsey Hussle. I close with that. And the fact that he wasn't even on my radar before he was killed. He wasn't on your radar before he was killed. And then we come to find out that he had more influence than a whole lot of pastors, preachers, politicians, and other windbags that run around in our society and our neighborhood. More impact than a lot of our social justice activists. For he was able to get peace and a truce between the Rolling 60s, the Crips, and the Bloods. As a matter of fact, if you saw his funeral and if you saw the demonstrations all last week and all of this week, you saw nothing but unity and harmony among the various opposing gangs in the city of Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, the chief of police, Michael Moore, who was getting ready to meet with Mr. Nipsey Hussle on the day in which he was killed. Think about that. And so he has set in place a model. Closing out with this, saying we don't always understand God's purpose. The Almighty has His own purposes. And you and I do not fully comprehend. We may look for salvation from one way, but God brings salvation His way. And while we're looking for it to come through the politician, the lawyer, and the preacher, it may not come that way. It may come from the rapper out in the street, all tattooed and all up like that. And we have to open our eyes, open our minds to discern and to hear the will of God. As I close, as I wrap up, as I get ready to get out of here, follow that paradigm. It was a very good business paradigm. Open a business in the neighborhood. Buy the property around you. Sell your product to your people and to everybody for that matter. But certainly do what you can where you are. Brighten the corner where you are. That young man, that Nipsey Hussle, he brightened that corner where he was. As I close, my brothers and my sisters, don't let people defraud you out of what they owe you. Do not accept exploitation. Speak up for yourself. Always demand justice. Always demand equality. Always demand that is right. It is always time to do right. And remember, if they want you to work, they should pay you. And if they don't want to pay you, then do not work for them. God bless you and may God keep you is our prayer until we meet again. Keep the faith. Thank you, Doc. We're out.
And nothing stings over all of my good days. All of my good days outweigh my bad days. Yes, they do. Outweigh my bad days. I just say thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Oh, no. I won't complain.